Compensation point is much higher on plants growing in full sun. And what that means is if a plant can produce a given amount of energy, it takes a higher proportion of the energy just to stay alive, which means that there is much less left over for things to grow. And I have people tell me all the time, well, I planted this stuff out there in May or June or whatever, and it's just not growing. That is to be expected in a real bright sunny area, because it literally is taking everything the plant can manage just to stay alive and to do well. With those plants, chances are you'll have a nice burst of growth in the fall when things start cooling down. But the reason for that is that as the weather cools down, the compensation point drops down, and the plant has a lot more energy left over to put into growth and to put into flowering and to put into other things other than just staying alive. Last thing I would tell you about just general physiological things that the sun does to plants is that it's pronounced in any situation, but it's very pronounced in the sun, in that the stem of any plant is full of cells that will tend to kind of stretch. They have a hormone in the cells that makes them stretch. This particular hormone is broken down by sunlight. So in brighter light, your stems tend to be much more compact. You'll get much thicker, fuller, bushier growth, which is in general a very good thing. But the thing that will really be pronounced is that if you have a plant that's only getting sun from one side, you've got something planted up under the eaves against the side of the house, and the only place it gets blasted is from sun coming in from one direction, what's going to happen? The sunlight is going to, if my arm is the stem of the plant, the sunlight is hitting it here. It's breaking down the hormone that makes the cells stretch on this side of the plant, but there's still plenty of that on the back side. So what happens? The cells on the back side of the stem grow faster, cells on the front side of the stem grow more slowly, so what happens? The plant does this. And in a sunny location, if you plant things in a spot that only gets sun from one side, you're going to have a lot more of a problem with the plants bending out toward the sunlight. Keep that in mind if you have big trees and you want to plant crepe myrtles or something else close to those trees. Put them far enough out. They're going to get a fair amount of sun on the back side. Otherwise, they'll just be growing at an angle like this all the time. Yes?
Can you affect the compensation point with fertilizer, for example?
Yes. With proper nutrients, you can. You're not changing the compensation point, but you're giving the plant more energy, so it's going to have left over to put into growth. Yes, proper fertilizer, spraying with, anything that's going to help the plants do better. Things like Medina Plus that are going to help the soil, compost tea that helps the soil, even, spraying down the plants, just syringing them down with water every now and then, freshly planted plants, you will definitely lower the compensation point to where the plant has more energy left over to grow. Very, very true.
Mr.
Yes,
Webster.
A potted plant, you could rotate it, couldn't you?
and that's what you do. If you are putting something on a porch in a container, you just keep spinning it so that it doesn't become totally one-sided.
How often do you have to do that, Bob?
I'd probably be doing it at least every 2 weeks. Kind of depends on how fast the plant grows. If it's something that grows quickly, like one of the sun-tolerant coleus or something, I mean, in 3 days' time, it's going to be doing this. You're going to be out spinning that pot around, every few days. If it's something that grows a little more slowly, like the Ixor or the hibiscus or the Esperanza, something like that, spinning it every couple of weeks is all you need to do. Yes, sir.
I have a question about vincas in relation to the sunny area. I know that, of course, you can't plant them early because of an airborne fungus that's
Right.
out there. Now's the time.
Absolutely.
The place that I would want to put them gets full sun all day long. Any extra precautions to take? Are they going to be tough enough to survive?
Well, if you look at our sign right in front of the nursery and the bed that we planted underneath there, full hot sun all day long, reflected heat off the street, and they just sit there and thrive.
They're pretty tough.
Yeah, they are tough plants, but remember, improve the soil, organic material, plenty of fertilizer to give them all the nutrition they need, water properly, which means water them thoroughly and deeply, and they're just hard to beat in the summer months. One thing about vincas, and I'll go ahead and talk about that, we'll talk about it a little bit more in a minute, but the diseases that they get are literally splashed up out of the soil onto the plant. So if you want to grow good vinca or periwinkle, whichever name you use for it, and by the way, that's what we're looking at right here, one of the new varieties. This one's called Cherry Halo. Best way to water this plant is to lay the hose on the ground, let it soak. If you have these things planted where a sprinkler system's hitting them all the time, you are increasing your chances of problems with them. But yeah, they're a great tough plant for the sun. Okay, I want to go on and talk a little bit about some of the different plants that do well in the sun. Any other general questions about getting them planted and getting them started? Yes, ma'am.
Today on the radio you talked about planting the bougainvillea in the ground in a pot. Now is that so you can take it out in the winter to save it? Or?
Well, it would help, but yeah, I mean, I had 8 people on hold the whole time this morning, and I'm trying to hurry through so that no people don't have to wait for 45 minutes, so I probably should have clarified that a little bit better. But bougainvillea seems to bloom best if it's root bound, if its roots are somewhat compacted. And that's why on bougainvilleas, I frequently recommend putting them in the ground but leaving them in the container. Gentleman's question this morning was, he called and I said, oh, it's in a plastic pot. It probably has plenty of holes in the bottom of it. He went and looked and said, no, there were only 4 holes in the whole pot or whatever. So in planting that plant in the ground, I was telling him drill some extra holes because you do want those roots to come out a bit so it gets established. Doesn't need water as often. But I just find that when you constrict the root system on a bougainvillea, that it just blooms much more heavily, and that's what that question was all about.
I have one in a 1-gallon pot. Should it be put into a larger pot before it's put into the ground?
Probably, yeah. 1 gallon's awfully small, but probably at least into a 10-inch pot or so. And you can take them out of the pot and put them in the ground. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you do that, they'll probably spend the first 6 or 8 months growing roots before they really start blooming.
That sounded so interesting. And then does it have to have something to climb on a trellis, or can it just be put into the ground where it bushes out?
You can just put it in the ground where it bushes out. If you want it tall, it will become taller more quickly if you support you know, some of those limbs, some of those outward growths just to hold them up. But bougainvillea, once it really takes off and gets started, it puts out these shoots that'll come straight up and grow 6 feet tall in a week's time. So it doesn't have to be staked up, but it'll sure be bigger, faster if you do.
Okay.
Yes.
I bought a Malabar spinach last week. Can it, big sunny fence, good place for it?
Yeah.
Okay.
It'll do very well there. Be very happy with that. There are so many plants. There are a lot of plants that just absolutely do love the sun. And it just is always amazing to me that you go to South Texas, go down the Rio Grande Valley where you rarely ever get a freeze. For the most part, their landscapes are atrocious down there. They're absolutely horrible. And these people have a place, and of course San Antonio seems to be getting milder. They've actually changed the plant hardiness zone. We're now listed in a warmer zone. Global warming is truly occurring. Now, I'm not going to blame it as much on mankind as some people would, but it just always amazes me. You go to this place where you can plant hibiscus and ixoras and bougainvilleas and copper plants and crotons and things like that, plant them out in the yard and have them do beautifully, and they don't. But I think if you've looked around San Antonio this year, following a mild winter, and looked at the bougainvilleas, looked at the hibiscus, things like that, you realize what a treat you can have planting colorful plants in the sun. Now, it's easy to grow shrubs, and granted we see a whole lot more problem with different kinds of shrubs where people have them in too much shade than where they have them in too much sun. As long as you prepare the soil, as long as you mulch, probably 85% of the shrubs and trees that you see here in the nursery would do extremely well in those situations. And if you're going to grow things like Yopon holly, if you're going to grow crepe myrtles, you really need lots and lots of sun for them to do well. So there's no great trick to getting green shrubs to grow in the sun. It's just a matter of preparing the soil. It's a matter of watering properly to get them up and growing. Ground covers, pretty much the same way. If you want to plant Asiatic jasmine, it's perfectly happy. It's one of those plants that's happy in sun or in shade. If you want to plant the vinca, now vinca major is the bigger form of the vinca, and it grows well in the sun. And gosh, there are a number of different native plants and things like that that all just really prefer the full hot sun. But I thought I'd run through really some of the perennials and tropicals that I think should be the backbone of a sunny landscape, because if you have good sun and you don't have just a constant show of color out there, you're really missing out on, you know, on a good opportunity to have a lot of gorgeous things. Bougainvilleas, we talked a little bit about. As long as you get the day neutral varieties. Remember, some of the older